Larissa's POV.
The look of disappointment expressly written on his face still lingered like some bitter aftertaste in my mouth, even after 2 weeks. He looked pained when I stopped us from crossing that line. What was I even saying? Somehow, we already crossed that line a long time ago. We both just didn't realize it. Maybe I did, but it was clear he did not. I still did not understand his actions. We'd almost slept together, but he pushed me away after I stopped us, albeit non-verbally. His body language said it all. He hasn't even spoken to me since then, if he was ever in the mansion at all. I picked up myself from the bed and took small strides to the single window in the room, deliberately ignoring the small whines of the toddler in my bed. Pushing the curtains open, I stared at the clouds that had formed some pretty shapes in the sky. They appeared heavy and were effectively blocking out the sun from showering the earth with light. Instead, what remained was the familiar gloom that came with the cloudy weather, one that plunged my thoughts into shallow confusion. It was hurtful, I told myself, relishing in the feel of soft wind rustling my hair that I'd tied back up in a ponytail. His scowls the next day, his complete avoidance, and the thoughts that somehow I had let myself go with this man whose voice said a different thing from his body. I found myself wondering what exactly it was. Perhaps it was because of his mate? Fortunately, that was the same reason I had stopped that day. He may not have gotten over her supposed death, or whatever wrong she did to him and Declan. I didn't want to give myself yet to a man who could never love me like I hoped for. At the same time, I wished he would let me into his personal bubble. It was even more hurtful that he was refusing to be direct with how he felt towards me. Was it simply lust, or because I took care of his son? I pushed back the curtains even further, resting my hands on the windowsill. My thoughts subconsciously drifted to that night again, the same night my life had been ruined. I didn't like the thought of it. I hated that somehow he still had a chokehold over me as much as I hated him. I shook my head as if that would dispel my thoughts and spun around to see the toddler jumping on the bed. It wasn't even a spring bed, so watching him reach only a few centimeters before falling onto the bed again made me chuckle. Smiling lightly to myself again, I walked back to the bed and scooped him up, earning soft giggles from him after tickling the skin behind his neck. I fell back onto the bed and placed a kiss on his forehead, closing my eyes as I did and loving the feeling of the child in my hands. Isa! Isa! His light voice rang across the room, pulling me out of my trance-like state. I whipped my eyes open and propped myself to a sitting position. He was kicking now, struggling to wring himself free from my embrace. I let him go and run around, finding myself slowly slipping back to worry for his father. Did he still hate me? Was he doing well? Was he stressed? I found myself worrying still for his well-being. It was going to hurt me still. Why I still let myself care was what I couldn't understand. Do you want more toys, Declan? I cooed in his ears, reaching out to hold him close after he had scooted far enough from where I had been sitting on the bed. His eyes lit up at that, and he nodded, practically jumping out of the bed and forcing me to follow suit almost immediately. I caught him before he would travel further, scooping him up before I pushed the door open, and the oddity of the environment caught me immediately. There were guards in front of my door. A whole dozen of them dressed in black cargo pants and combat boots were littered upstairs, and I could see another good number by the French doors where I had seen the Alpha that day. I felt the hairs on my body raise in surprise at the sight, staring at the ones who made eye contact with me in confusion. Did the mansion ever have so many guards? What's going on? I asked quietly, tightening my grip on Declan, who appeared the least bit bothered. I could feel him tense up, but there was no visible response from him. One guard whose face I was unfamiliar with walked up to where I stood, towering over me with his hands behind his back. Orders from the Alpha to protect the mansion at all costs. He answered stiffly. His expression was blank as well, causing me to want to snort. Instead, I kept eye contact, well aware that I probably looked mortified as hell. Is something going on? The Alpha has taken his best men out for a mission. So in the meantime, everybody is encouraged to stay put until he returns. Which means no one is allowed to leave the mansion. Excuse me? If you need anything, you can reach out to the guards. We'll take your requests. He replied even stiffer than the first time, sending me a small glare before walking back to his position. I smiled awkwardly watching him leave, even if a part of me wanted to snicker back. I still didn't understand what was going on. Mission? Was the pack in trouble? Wait. Larissa! Larissa! Gwen's high-pitched yell was startling. I could recognize her voice as soon as I heard it. I shifted my attention to the stairs where Gwen was running, halting in her tracks right in front of me. Her breathing was unsteady, she had her hands on her knees while struggling to catch her breath. I backed up 2 steps in surprise, watching her wave her hands frantically before straightening up. Larissa, did you hear? My expression relaxed at that. She was hitting her chest now as if that would help her breathing before waving at the toddler who'd nearly jumped out of my arms at her startling screams. I think I just did. I mean, there are a bunch of guards everywhere who say that they have orders not to let anyone leave the mansion. She nodded like a human child who was seeing candy for the first time before closing the distance between us so she could whisper in my ears. It makes me wonder if we're under siege. Shush! I tapped at her shoulders a little harsher than I wanted, but it was enough for her to roll her eyes at me and go back to looking around with her arms folded. I found myself wondering if everything was okay. He just disappeared overnight? To a mission? He had to be okay in the end. Not for me, I told myself. For his son. Everything was for Declan. I sighed one last time, passing Declan over to Gwen and silently pleading that she would take him to his room. I started down the stairs only to see yet another crowd in the living room. Except that this time, it wasn't only the guards present in the living room. There were a bunch of unfamiliar faces, a few who were sitting on the couch and a number of people who were standing and appeared agitated. Confused, their heads turned when they sensed me on the stairs. There was a woman who sat on the cathedra whose head whipped around faster than the others. She appeared pleasant-faced, yet there was a demeaning air of authority that oozed from her being. Her hair was a deep brown and was now staring at my soul. I shifted uncomfortably, grateful that her back was still turned away from me. Can we have some water, please? One of the men in the room asked, staring at me with plea in his eyes. Still startled, it took me a full minute to process what was going on. Who were all these people and why were they here? As in he could read my thoughts, he chuckled awkwardly. The Alpha asked us to come to his mansion for the period he'll be away. We don't have homes, you see. He sounded broken, smiling through his statement before looking away. He turned to look back at me, flashing me another pitiful smile. I nodded swiftly, walking straight to the kitchen to set up several trays of water. At this point, I wished Gwen would join me in the kitchen. The maids in the mansion were always nowhere in sight. I always thought he refused to eat them work just to spite me. I walked back to the living room carefully, studying the tray in my hands before placing it on the coffee table. Never in 1,000 years would I have imagined that serving people with water and hearing their gratitude would be so exhilarating. I found myself smiling without thinking. The regular people of the pack were the sweetest, making me wonder even more what exactly had gone wrong with their alpha. The brown-haired woman kept her gaze transfixed on me, making me gulp many times no matter how much I wanted to ignore it. I would rather she spoke up than looking at me like that. Forcing another smile, I glanced back at her before walking up to where she sat with her legs crossed. Up close, I had to admit that she was one beautiful woman. Her appearance vastly differed from that of the other people in the room, donned in a simple black dress and an intensely red lipstick. Even her poise screamed grace. Except for the blankness in her eyes, she reminded me of my mother. "Miss, would you like a glass of water?" I asked softly, mustering a kind smile in her direction. She seemed surprised, judging from how her pupils dilated ever so slightly. She nodded afterwards, smiling tightly in return. A glass of water and 3 cubes of ice would be enough. Her voice was like velvet. I hadn't met her before, but something about it was oddly familiar. The voice wasn't, the tone was. I nodded at her response and walked back to the kitchen to bring her glass of water. She looked amused when I returned, taking the glass from my hands with the most graceful movements. Her eyes traveled to mine, and I finally saw her smile back genuinely. "Oh, you're so kind!" One woman called out dramatically, catching me by surprise. I wanted to laugh back and ask her what she meant, but another wail caught my attention. Right? She's so different from the one who shall not be named. I saw the woman who sat on the cathedra raise a brow ever so slightly while the people chattered. She agreed to give us a glass of water. If the one who should not be named were still here, she would have driven us out. She wouldn't even spare us some water. She was so brutal. For fuck's sake, call her name. She's dead, isn't she? Yet another spoke up with a snicker, glancing around before continuing. We all know the former Luna is dead. And she was. Enough! I turned around, startled by the sudden yell. It was the brown-haired woman standing now, with a frown on her face. Do not speak of the dead like that. No matter what she did, she was still your Luna. The entire living room fell near silent at that. But there was another question lingering in my head. Amaya, who was she? What kind of person was she for her subjects to dislike her so much? I felt someone tap at my shoulders, and I turned around to see that first man that had spoken to me. He was smiling again, but lighter than before. They're telling the truth, my dear. You're not like her. She hated us, and frankly we didn't like her either. The Alpha's mother is just upset to her daughter-in-law. Excuse me, who? And my eyes followed his finger that pointed towards the once intimidating aura in the room, whose eyes darted around as though she was blinking back tears.
Cadence POV.
Secure all of their pressure points. I instructed, watching the men before me bow in response and as a pledge of allegiance. The entrance. Survey the back area for opposition as well. And report back to me once that is cleared up. They nodded again, stealthily walking towards the woods that surrounded the pack house. I smiled to myself before turning to look at them stronger men who had come with me. Jacob, you go with them and make sure everything goes as planned. Joshua, Jackson, and Hunter, you're coming with me. This is going to be one bloody visit. They chorused in response, and Jacob flashed me a small smirk before strapping his bow tightly across his back. I couldn't see it, but I knew. Jacob would never go into battle with one weapon. He reminded me of myself. Take them out when they least expect it. It was more dignifying than ambushing them because they knew they were in danger. The dangerous thing was that they didn't know how. Fools like them knew how to stage an attack without planning to defend. Of course, he said one last time before disappearing after them. I turned away from his faded silhouette and turned my attention to the rest of them. Saddle up, boys! With that, I walked back to where Jackson had parked the SUV several feet from the gate to the pack house. The name South Sea was less than befitting for a small pack who only had a lake surrounding it. See, my ass. The environment was more befitting for other beasts that slept in the woods. Jackson took the wheel yet again, driving it to the front gate where two guards stood. He pulled up, turning off the ignition when they wouldn't budge before alighting the car. The two guards walked up to where Jackson stood, speaking in hushed tones. I smirked when he started to retie his bun, pulling out his claws in the process and scratching across his face. The other guard growled loudly, but Jackson was just in time to duck out of his reach and send his claws flying straight to his abdomen. He pulled the gates open himself before returning to the car, dabbing his bloodied hands with some tissue. Driving the car into the compound, I could see some of the guards rushing towards the car with weapons. I couldn't blame them though. The wave of dust that came with Jackson nearing causing the car to skid was enough to cause temporary blindness. Should we attack, my lord? Joshua questioned, drawing out his fangs, but I shook my head, still reserving the sarcastic smirk. Not yet. In their eyes, they have done us no wrong. It would only cause an unnecessary scene if we attack them now without getting to the good part. With that, I alighted the car as well, patting off the dust from my jacket. I could see the Luna standing at the entrance, just opposite where I stood with shock expressly written on her face. I smiled at her seeing her like that, shoving my hands into my pockets as I approached her. By this time, her beta had arrived by her side, and we were fully surrounded by her guards who drew out weapons at us. You might want to ask them to drop those, dear Luna. I taunted with a smirk, taking one step in her direction. I saw her demeanor shift from shock to an embossing version of confidence as she rose a hand, forcing them to pull their weapons back. She turned to her beta, whispering something in his ears before turning her attention to me. I see you got my letters, Alpha Caden. But you're awfully late, don't you think? I'm right on time, my dear. I continued with a condescending lip tilt. Right on time. Won't you let me in? Her heavily smoky eyes narrowed as if in thought before she looked back at me, folding both hands behind her. Very well then, Alpha. But those three. She pointed at the men who stood behind me. Stay outside. I laughed at that, running one hand through my hair and rapidly switching to a stoic face. I don't believe that you would like to see them stay outside. They are more than capable of causing mayhem, if you imagine mayhem to be sending your guards to hell. Her expression had fallen into a deep frown. I could sense her discomfort, but I had to give her credit for masking it well. Mayhem? I thought you came to address the letters. Yes, and they have to be involved. No. I smiled at that. She'd gotten smarter, and that made me want to rip out her head even more. She was baiting me, even when she was well aware that I could end her life now. I smiled at her nonetheless, signaling for them to remain outside with the rest of the guards. You know what to do, Joshua. I mind-linked him, glancing at the rest of them before walking inside with her and her awful-looking beta. She took a seat on one armchair with her beta standing just behind her, while I sat opposite her with my legs crossed. This was by far the most amusing approach I'd taken to get rid of a bug like this Luna. I enjoyed the feeling of seeing her fidget in her seat, sparing me glances before gulping down a glass of wine and refilling it every time. I didn't know the Luna of the South Sea Pack was such a terrible host. I went through all that trouble to come here, and I have to ask for a glass of water. I teased again, still wearing the same smirk. She whipped up her head at that, motioning for her beta to pour me a glass of wine. So what do you want, Alpha Caden? Curious much? She narrowed her eyes even further, finally setting down her glass. What are you here for? If you cannot state your mission, I'd have to kindly ask you to take your men and leave. My smirk finally faltered. This was getting boring really quick. I straightened at that, pulling one leg from the other so that my legs were slightly parted. I heard your boyfriend died. I started, rising to my feet. What was his name again? Nick, I think. How do you know him? She couldn't hide the fear in her voice any longer. It was clear, but her attempts at playing dumb was beginning to irritate me. He was my beta, you wench. I snapped at that, watching her recoil into her seat with an O escaping her lips. Why did you kill him? She cocked a brow, sipping at her wine again. Excuse me? Make me repeat myself again, and those will be the last words you will hear. She rose to her feet at that with a frown. Deep creases had formed on her forehead, and if anything, she had gone pale. I won't have you come to my pack and accuse me, she screamed, pulling out her claws. Her beta did the same at that, but the sounds of ripping flesh and piercing screams forced her to halt her hysteria and brought a victorious smile to my lips. Those are your guards' bodies welching, dear Luna. You might want to pull your claws back in. I continued, slowly drawing claws of my own. But rather than take my word for it, she smiled. The most sarcastic smile I'd seen in a long time. If she wasn't such a bitch, we may have actually gotten along. You've got nothing on me, Caden. They will have their way no matter what you do, she said, still smiling at the ruckus outside. Before I could react, she charged at me with both claws, screaming her lungs out and scratching at everything in her wake. I caught her just on time before she made for my face, but there was another scratch at my back that caused me to wince and finally snap. Angrily, I tossed her into the large bar that stood close to the entrance and spun around to deliver a hard punch to his temples. He fell to the ground, and as if on cue, Jackson and Hunter were in the room, pinning him in place. I walked back to where I had tossed the bitch who was breathing harshly, with splinters of glass scattered around the small pool of blood that formed from her bleeding head. Crouching to her eye level, I yanked her hair backwards to force her to look at me. The blood from her head had trickled to her eyes, nearly blinding one of them. The other was glaring at me, however, and the sides of her lips curved upwards in mockery. Who are you working for? What are they after? How much did they promise you? Rather than answer, she wriggled her lips, and the next thing I felt was bloodied saliva flying in my face. She smiled at that and spat in my face again. I could feel rage welling up inside me before shoving her head into the broken cabinet again. And here I was thinking you actually needed help. How disappointing. Her beta was groaning and pulling and fighting back at Jackson and Hunter, but they were quick to send a punch in his abdomen to silence him. Feeling a smirk taking its home on my lips, I wiped off the saliva from my face and shifted my attention back to the woman who was otherwise limp without my hands in her hair. So, will you talk now, or I should go ahead and pulverize your face? No response. I reached down to her ears, feeling her tense at that. It just might interest you to know that your entire pack's surrounded. So whether or not you talk, I would still find out the truth. You genuinely believe I care? She spat back, wearing a smirk of her own. Go ahead, kill them all. See if your pack would remain safe after this. And if you're going to kill me, you might as well do that now. You want to die that much? Yes. She laughed out, although I couldn't tell if she was laughing or coughing hysterically. Yes, and I owe you no apologies. Long live the moon. I could feel my muscles tense at that. The moon? What did she even mean? What? Kill me already! She spat back. I could see her drawing her fangs out at that, and I sent her head flying into the cabinet yet again. She smiled even wider every time I slammed her head until I ripped it apart in frustration. I stared at the severed head sitting on the floor with one eye gorged out, subtly smiling to myself. I turned my attention to the beta who had stopped wrestling to free himself from their grip. Instead, he was limp and wide-eyed, staring at the body of the woman he once swore to protect with his life. Are you going to talk or I have to incapacitate you as well? No. No. They asked us to do it. His voice came out frantic as he shook his head. I walked up to where he was. I swear I had no choice. She agreed to it. They're the ones behind everything. Without thinking, I pulled out my claws. I was angry beyond words. Who was this bastard? Just how much power did he hold? Even allies were now turning their backs at me. I sent my claws scratching at his face until it had become a bloodied mess, angrier at the fact that he wouldn't fight back. He soon fell to the ground when I had reached deep down to get his organs out. Staring at the gore in front of me one last time, I hissed at the sight and walked out of the messy living room with the two men trailing behind me. The clashing outside hadn't stopped yet, but it was clear that the guards of the pack were being overpowered. Kill them all. Every single one. I don't want their ugly asses as prisoners or souvenirs. I yelled out, watching the clash unfold before my eyes. All too quickly, the fight had died out and I could spot Jacob in the middle of the ruckus clutching his left waist.
Larissa's POV.
I heard the front gate rustle open from Declan's room where I was sitting on the marbled floors, softly rocking the toddler to sleep and struggling to control my own agitation. The Alpha has been gone for 2 days already. Even the clouds outside had the appearance of impending doom. The toddler wriggled in my arms, slowly opening his eyes at the sudden wave of noise that hit the room from the living room. Startled, I ran my hands through my hair to keep him asleep before taking away the wooden knife in his hands and placing him on the bed. I rose to my feet, still confused by the ruckus, and pattered to the door. I pulled it open and my eyes narrowed at the sight. The guards that had been loitering upstairs and wouldn't even give me some room to breathe were now nowhere in sight. Instead, I was greeted by a coldness that was reminiscent of regular rainy days. There was nobody around, but I could hear the newfound boisterousness that engulfed the living room and piqued my curiosity. Hesitating, I found myself wondering if we were actually under attack. But if we were, the aura of the entire Builing would have been drastic. It wouldn't sound like praises morphed with excitement. I sighed, resigning to whatever the case would be, and reached the top of the stairs only to see the front door wide open and a good number of people crowding the entrance. At the door stood the Alpha in all of his essence. I could swear my heart skipped a beat seeing him stand there like that. He had both hands to his hips, breathing unsteadily while greeting the people of the pack that had taken refuge in the mansion the 2 days he was absent. He had a tight smile on his lips as they bowed at him, murmuring greetings till he finally looked up, locking eyes with mine. I saw something flash in his eyes when he looked at me, and my heart leaped again. I missed him. I was happy to see him, although he was some considerable meters away, but he would never know that. He didn't care enough to know that. He continued to bore holes in my soul until he was pulled into a hug by the same poised brown-haired woman who'd asked me for some ice. She whispered something in his ears and his face fell flat, mirroring the look in my eyes. I felt a small pang of hurt pinch at my chest at that, and I forced myself to look away. Of course, she had to be one of his many admirers, and it was even more hurtful that he always entertained their excesses. Yet I couldn't tear my eyes away from him, and it was only a matter of time before his eyes met mine. Surprise flashed through them, and I watched him slowly pry himself away from the woman before giving her a curt bow. The greetings and ecstatic noises continued even as I stood there, but I noticed him disappear from the crowd and start for the stairs. I didn't look away until he reached the top of the stairs, looking at me with unreadable eyes before heaving a sigh. I finally had to look away. The weight of his eyes on me was making moths flap around in my stomach. "You're not happy I came back?" he half hissed out, taking brisk steps towards me till he was only a few feet away from me. His eyes were searching mine even as he cocked a brow, shoving both hands in his pockets. I took a step back, uncomfortable at the proximity, before clearing my throat. "Welcome back from your trip," I muttered lowly before meeting his eyes again. He took one step towards me, and I took another back. He did it again, and I had to take yet another step back, slowly growing irritated. What was he doing? Was he here to taunt me again? Before I could think about any other thing, he pulled me into an embrace. The hell? My blood ran cold at that, even I stood there frozen before simply heating up to the temperature of boiling water. I heard him sniff my hair and inhaled deeply before letting out a raspy sigh. "How's my son?" I felt the vibration resonate through my nerves. Having never been attached to him while he spoke, this was a not-so-welcome surprise. I didn't particularly like that. I liked the vibration, lost in my own little world in my head when he slowly shook me, waiting for a response. "Yes, Declan. He's asleep. I could get him for you if you'd like to see him." "No need," he responded with a small snort and pulled away. "It's good that way." "I'm glad you're fine," I blurted out and met his eyes, taking in his surprise and relaxation at the same time. The corners of his eyes twitched slightly, drawing my attention to his eyes. His pupils were dilated, and the beautiful chromatic silver rings around his irises appeared to have widened in the slightest. He let out another raspy sigh before speaking again. But I didn't pay attention to anything he said. I recognized the woody scent that had nearly driven me insane only a few days ago. It was taking a lot of willpower to simply stare at him and not do anything, so it was until I felt soft skin on my lips that snapped me straight back to reality. He kissed me. He kissed me again, and I flinched, meeting his face that had been brought to light by a small smirk that graced his lips. Shush. He was searching my eyes again, this time for something else. Then he took my hand and pulled me towards his room. He was violent with the doorknob, jamming it when it wouldn't come undone. I bit back a giggle, remembering the last time he fought with the door. "Fuck," he growled lowly, kicking the door open forcefully before pulling me inside by my wrists. He shut the door to the dim room, turning back to look at me. I was certain he enjoyed the feeling of seeing him cower away from him. Because when he did, he smirked and closed the distance between us in swift steps, only sparing me a glance before latching his lips onto mine. Something at the back of my mind was telling me how wrong this was. But a part of me wanted to just enjoy the feeling of him raking through my body and kissing me like I was the most important thing in the world. Curse you, mating season. I brought my hands to circle his neck, tilting my neck and letting him explore my mouth. I had no significant skills, but he took the lead, tugging at my bottom lip before gently thrusting through with his tongue. It didn't take long for the heat to travel to my core, and I couldn't help but let out a soft moan at the feel of his tongue. He gently pushed us both till my legs hit the edge of the bed and fell with me without leaving my lips for once. I wanted to let my hands explore his rock-hard chest, so I let my fingers do all the work, slowly undoing his buttons, tracing his pectus and feeling his nipples harden. Euphoria wasn't a solid description of how I felt when he started to kiss away from my lips, grunting lowly as he kissed his way to the nape of my neck. He began to suck gently at the same spot, and I let out another moan at that, thrusting my hands into the silky softness of his. I felt him smile against my skin before biting it ever so gently. How does that feel? He whispered against my skin. It felt tingly as much as it was teasing. Whatever words I had to say were stuck at the back of my throat. I couldn't say anything, instead I let out a low hum and felt him smile again before biting harder. It was beginning to hurt, but I loved it anyways. Fisting his hair, I let him continue, arching my back ever so slightly. My legs were quivering even as the heat grew in my core. I felt fear rouse itself in me. Was I actually going to do this now? I really didn't want to care anymore. I would rather live in the moment and regret it later. He began kissing his way up again, quickly recapturing my lips swiftly before thrusting his tongue back into twirl around mine. I gasped softly at the intensity. He was kissing me so hard that I feared he would draw blood at some point. His fingers got to work too, leaving my hips to caress the skin on my thighs after my flowery dress had ridden up so high. They continued to travel up my body. He was taking his time distracting me with his lips and working his fingers till they grazed my waist. I was ticklish there and I winced, but those strong hands held me in place. I already felt my own nipples start to hurt, straining against the fabric of my bra. He pulled away and returned his lips to my neck, prying off my dress slowly until the chiffon fabric had pulled around my waist. Before I could think again, his lips had taken their home on my chest. He continued to kiss his way down without undoing my bra, just kissing over it teasingly before running one fine string of kisses along my abdomen with soft grunts. I couldn't hold back any more moans even if they were muted, because Declan's room was just next door. I let myself relish in the moment. But they stopped. They stopped all too quickly, his hands, his lips, his kisses, and the seductive shine in his eyes. Instead, he just hovered over me like a mortified frozen statue. "Amaya?" He whispered harshly, running glances over my body before his expression contorted into a disgusting frown. Confused, I was looking at him in hopes for an explanation, but he said nothing and propped himself away to the empty side of his bed. He was doing this again. And I let him do it. I forced myself to sit up as well, feeling disgusted with myself and with the selfish bastard in front of me who had his hands in his hair like I had less than a minute ago. My hands were trembling as I struggled to fix my clothes, and I felt hot, angry tears brimming in my eyes. I hated him. I hated the power he had over me and the emptiness in his eyes when he finally turned to look at me. He looked angry, and the fact that he looked like that made me even angrier. "You should leave," he muttered, rising to his feet and staring at nothingness. I couldn't believe it. He brought me her himself. No. All of the words remained stuck at the back of my throat. I clutched my chest in agonizing hurt, finally breaking. I couldn't hold back the hurt in my eyes. Fuck him if he thought I was a plaything for his use. No, I said no. Excuse me? What the fuck am I to you? Why do you keep toying with my feelings? I screamed out, rising to my feet as well. He would probably order for my beheading tonight, but I could care less. I was so damn tired of this cycle and his own problems. What have I done wrong to you? My voice had grown into a harsh whisper as I struggled to blink back the tears that were now on free fall. You keep saying one thing and doing the other. I'm not Amaya, for fuck's sake. I don't know who she is. I'm not Amaya. My voice had broken completely at this point, mirroring the look in his eyes as he stood there staring at me like I'd given him some reality check. I will never be Amaya, so give me a damn break if you still think that somehow I'd become your lost mate. Shut up. Well, I don't want to. I cried out again, snapping at him and forcing him to step back. I know your wife is dead and you want her back, but that has nothing to do with me. It's not my fault that I'm so hopelessly in love with you, Alpha. I gulped at that. I should have stopped myself instead of blurting out like that. But the deed had been done already, and I could swear I saw confusion flash in his eyes at that. It only fueled my own embarrassment. I couldn't stand being in the same room as him any longer. Just leave me the fuck alone. I choked out one last time before pushing past him and running out of the door. I didn't stop once to look at him. I didn't want to hate myself even more. I ran straight to my room, slamming it shut before climbing into my bed to cry my eyes out on my pillow. I rolled myself up to a fetal position, sobbing harshly and screaming into my pillow in self-disgust. Fuck you, Caden.